So senators just voting to acquit the president on both articles of impeachment, but critics say deep scars will remain in Washington. Joining us now is presidential historian, author of Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency, Mr. Doug Wead. Great to see you, Doug. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you, Dave.
Now, the bitterness of this partisan battle really boiled over last night and ended up with Nancy Pelosi doing something that I've never seen before. You're the historian, where she actually ripped up the president's speech. That, by the way, was an official document, so I didn't even know if that's supposed to be allowed. But how do you think history is going to judge her behavior and those of people who really went over the line here?
Yeah, I think that was immature.
You
I don't usually throw that around because I'm immature myself, but I compare Nancy Pelosi to the First Lady. I mean, they booed her when she was on stage at a school, and she defended them, was very kind, and like a patient mother with a rowdy child. And when I compare the First Lady's maturity, not just her poise, but her maturity to Nancy Pelosi, it's pathetic. Sorry.
Doug, it seems to me that the scars that we're going to have from this are not so much on the back of the president. I think, like Clinton, he will go on and history will judge him for many other reasons. I think the problem is that the partisanship of this process, the lowering of the bar on these counts that they around which they crafted the articles of impeachment, I think that makes the going forward makes this resolution or this process much more accessible to people. I think that is a terrible thing that Nancy Pelosi has done to the country.
That's a very astute observation, and I think you're right about that. I mean, history's going to read this stuff as not just feel it, like we're feeling it, but when you read Adam Schiff's conclusion of really 3 years of harassment of Donald Trump, it ends with a false story, the CBS story that said that the president said he'd have your head on a spike if you don't. It was a false story, and you think that's your conclusion to impeachment? That threw Murkowski. That's why she flipped the other way. She was open to voting for more witnesses, but it was such an insult to her intelligence to be lied to about something she knew. She was a senator and knew that it hadn't happened.
Yeah, although you do know that even though the Republicans who impeached Andrew Johnson are not much respected by history for having passed a tenure of office out to kind of set him up for that, nor is Andrew Johnson particularly well remembered by history, even though he did narrowly escape, he was impeached, but narrowly escaped being removed from office. So simply because it went one way or the other is no guarantee at all of any kind of historical retrospective vindication.
Well, that's right. The reason I said that was because it's so partisan. I mean, you compare it to Nixon, where the leader in the Senate, Republican leader, the leader Rhodes in the House, and the former nominee went to Nixon and said, you got to go, pal, his own people. But it's a brutal process. And you mentioned Andrew Johnson. I have a wonderful letter from Robert Johnson, who was the de facto chief of staff. He was the secretary to the president, his son. And he took his life. After the Johnsons left the White House, he died in a suicide. That lets you know how brutal the process is. I asked Ivanka, how are you holding up under this? She says, I will not be bitter. I choose to be happy. I can't function unless I'm happy, so I choose to be happy. I thought that was remarkable.
Doug, you know, you look at Bill Clinton, who was a very successful president when it came to the economy, and yet I would make the case that his, you know, as we look back at his presidency, it has been stained, no pun intended, by, you know, what happened in that impeachment. And I wonder if you were advising Donald Trump, you know, moving forward, how do you move beyond, you know, the impeachment? Because it is an embarrassment, you know, to a president, and Trump certainly wanted to avoid it. What would your advice be?
I'm the last guy. If I had been advising Trump, he never would have been elected president. I have advised presidents, and some of them were successful, but he just breaks the mold entirely. It is truly amazing to me what he's been able to accomplish. It's a high wire act, but it's way out of my league.
Hi, Doug. You know, when you look at the Constitution, right, it really relies on good and sound leadership. And the impeachment process is something that we all cherish, right? But the thing is that Nancy actually used impeachment and will likely soon to regret it. But you know what? The country is divided. Her party's divided. If you were advising Nancy Pelosi, what would you tell her?
Boy, you know, I go back to Adam Schiff's conclusion. Half of the country are Democrats, 90% of the media, all of Hollywood. They couldn't get anybody to vet their material. I mean, it wouldn't pass a high school debate preparation. It's really astonishing to me, but it shows how partisan it is, and it's show business. It's politics.
Yeah. We saw the show business on display last night in many quarters, particularly as Nancy Pelosi was shuffling those papers behind the president, obviously trying to distract everybody from what he was saying. Doug Wead, great to see you. Great times for historians and journalists, though, I must say.
That's right.
A lot of material there.